See. Says my webcam, does that have anything to do with it?
Yeah, there we are.
All right. Well, it looks like it's 6:01. Martin, have you heard from Sue whether or not she would be here?
Were you speaking to me, Jordan?
Yeah, if you're there, Martin. Did you hear anything about Sue being unable to attend? I did not. So.
I did not hear anything.
Oh, sorry. Martin Cooney, Vice Chair. Did you hear anything? It's caller 4 by chance. Is that Sue?
Bill, can you hear me? Bill, Byron, can you hear me?
Byron, I can hear you, yes.
Okay.
All right, let's see. I'm going to call one more time. Is Sue Shirk on the line? Chair Shirk? Doesn't sound like it. All right. Mr. Vice Chair Martin Cooney, do you hear me?
I do.
Okay. Would you, it looks like we're just about ready to go. If you wouldn't mind getting the meeting started, I will ask first if City 7 is ready and prepared to live stream.
Okay, sure.
All right, let me double check with City 7 and make sure they are prepared to live stream before we get started, and then I'll give everybody a thumbs up.
Unmuted.
Oh, we are live. Okay, perfect. All right, well, Martin, if you are ready, we can go ahead and if you want to kick off the meeting.
Sure, very good. Good evening. On behalf of the City of Independence, I'd like to welcome each of you to on City 7 and YouTube for the March 11th, 2021 meeting of the Independence Tax Increment Financing Commission. For those of you who are unfamiliar with our meetings, it's the responsibility of this commission to hold public hearings and make recommendations to the Independence City Council on redevelopment plans, redevelopment areas, and TIF projects in accordance with the city's tax increment financing policy. Jordan, can you go ahead and call the roll, please?
Yes. Commissioner Brew?
Hello.
Commissioner Brew, okay. Commissioner John? Commissioner Cormendi? I know I heard Grace before. If you could unmute yourself, Grace. All right, we'll circle back around. Commissioner Cooney?
Yes, present.
Commissioner Martin?
Present.
Let's see. Commissioner Sampson?
Yes, I'm present. Commissioner Sampson.
Thank you. Commissioner Swanson?
Present and accounted for.
Commissioner Clifford?
Present.
Commissioner Schulte?
Present.
Chair Shirk? And we'll go back to either Commissioner John or Commissioner Cormendi. Grace, are you caller two?
Yeah, for some reason the system is muting me, but yeah, I'm here.
Okay, great. Thank you very much.
Uh-huh.
All right. We do have a quorum.
All right, thank you. It appears that the first item on the agenda is election of officers. There are 2 officer positions available, chair and vice chair. Does the chair hear a nomination?
This is Mr. Brew. I nominate Martin Cooney
For the vice chair or for the chair?
for the chair.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Got it. Sorry, who said that?
Commissioner Martin.
Thank you. Are there other nominations? All hearing none, all in favor say aye.
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 Aye. Aye.
Opposed, nay. All right, that motion carries. Do we have a nomination for the vice chair?
This is Ron Brew. I nominate Sue Strick.
Is there a second? There's no second. Are there other nominations to come before the commission for the vice chair? Step right up. Jordan, while folks are thinking, I guess I may have gotten a little ahead of myself. Do we need to do a roll call on those election votes, or can we just do it by voice vote?
No, voice vote is fine. And I should point out, I neglected to call Mr. Potter's name during the roll call, and I did note that he was here, so just wanted to correct the record on that.
Thank you. So we need nominations for a vice chair. Sue was nominated. Any other nominations or a second to Sue Shirk?
I'll second it.
And that was Mr. Martin?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Further nominations? Hearing none, all in favor say aye.
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 Opposed, nay. That motion carries. Sue Shirk is elected vice chair. I think that is the, looks like that's all the housekeeping business that comes before the commission. So we can go ahead and move into the public hearing portion of the tonight's hearing. Would everyone who intends to testify please raise their right hand and swear an oath? All right. Do you solemnly swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth before this commission? If so, please answer one at a time. I do.
I do.
I do.
I do.
I do. Is that everybody? Mr. Constance looks like Did you weigh in on that? I didn't hear you. I think you're muted, Mr. Constance. There we go.
Yes, I do.
Very good. Anybody else that I missed? These screens are awfully small and I'm having trouble seeing if I missed anybody. Looks like not. All right, Jordan, the staff's going to provide an introduction of the project.
Yeah, that's correct. The city has received an application from Crackerneck Creek LLC to amend the Crackerneck Creek TIF plan. The applicant is represented tonight by their attorney, William Moore. And at this time, I will turn it over to him to present their case.
Mr. Moore?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, my name is Bill Moore. I'm an attorney with Rouse, Fretz, White Goss, Gentile Rhodes. Our offices are located in Kansas City, Missouri. Here on behalf of the applicant, Crackerneck Creek LLC. Also present this evening as part of the Crackerneck Creek LLC group is Byron Constance. Other members of the LLC are John Evans, J.R. Stewart, and David Moore. Also present this evening will be Case and Associates Properties, the developer of the proposed 275 unit apartment project. So also joining us is Mike Case, Scott Case, and Justin Dixon. And with me tonight also is Kelly Madinger, financial analyst at Rouse Fretz, and Kelly will be helping with to run the PowerPoint presentation. So let's talk a little bit about to introduce the First Amendment to the Crackerneck Creek TIF plan. So this is an amendment, a request to amend the TIF plan to allow for multifamily residential development. Specifically in this instance, it's to allow for the construction of approximately 275 multifamily residential units by Case and Associates. You're going to hear a little bit more about this from Scott Case, so I am not going to go into any detail other than to identify it's multiple buildings, 2 and 3 story mixtures, and 1 and 2 bedroom units. This development was considered by the Independence Planning Commission on December 8, 2020, and was recommended for approval to the City Council. So what's this TIF amendment do for the city and for the project area? First of all, it will result in a substantial increase in revenue for the repayment of the TIF bonds. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about this in detail in a second. I think it's important to note that in this particular project, which was begun in 2004, the last year that TIF pilots, those are the incremental increase in the real property taxes, the last year that those will be collected and deposited into the special allocation fund for the City of Independence will be 2026. What this means is that in 2027, there will be a significant real property tax boost for each and every taxing district. And again, we're going to go through a couple of slides on that. You all have seen this, I'm sure, already, looking at the proposed TIF plan amendment that was provided to you. Next slide. So this slide is giving you, will orient you to where the project area is that we're talking about. It's the area that's in blue. To the north is Hobby Lobby Mardell. To the east is the Bass Pro Shop, as well as the 18-acre lake and park owned by the City of Independence. Again, you're going to hear more about this particular site and the development of it from Scott Case a little bit later in the presentation. Next. So let's talk a little bit about the history of the falls at Crackerneck Creek. In 2004, there were discussions that began between the City of Independence and the Crackerneck Creek LLC, the partners, about forming a public-private partnership for the development of that site in order to make it developable and acceptable to Bass Pro to locate their store at this location. The site is a large undeveloped tract, was a large undeveloped tract of ground. And for those of you who were here prior to the beginning of this project, you're going to remember that site. It was a big hole. It was a drainage basin for an entire regional area. And as a result of that drainage over years and years and years, there was a significant amount of alluvial soil. The significance of that is that in order to make it developable, there needed to be a very unique compaction method to allow for it to be brought up to an appropriate grade and made available to properties for development. So the partners and the city began talking to Bass Pro about building a new store there. They got a commitment, and that commitment came with some conditions. The partners then negotiated with the city. Again, this is back in 2004, the terms of a memorandum of understanding, or an MOU, and that was signed by the city and the partners. That MOU set forth in great detail the terms and conditions of what would eventually become the final approved TIF plan and the redevelopment agreement. So some of those conditions in that MOU and the redevelopment agreement are as follows. The city and Bass Pro would have to enter into a long-term lease. The city would have to issue debt for purposes of financing those extraordinary expenses to make the site developable and prepare the site for future development. The city would have to provide an incentive to Bass Pro to build its store. In addition, a transportation development district was formed, which would help pay for those significant public improvement costs. And finally, a state TIF allocation was granted to help pay for those public improvement costs. Next. Also, requirement was the partners were to construct all of the public improvements. Those public improvements included roads and utilities, an 18-acre city lake, a 70-foot waterfall, walking trails, conservation area, decorative bridges, and a huge rock retaining wall throughout the development. In addition, they were required to mass grade the entire site, which was part of the mitigation of those alluvial soils that we talked about. Finally, they were to deliver a pad-ready site to Bass Pro. Next. So Bass Pro started construction and opened its store in 2008. Unfortunately, 2008 is also when the Great Recession hit, bringing to a standstill virtually all development, not only in this city, but cities across the country. Retail development suffered, including at the falls of Crackerneck Creek. During this time period and years later, the partners had been approached by numerous developers wanting to put apartments into this project area. They were turned away because the TIF plan did not allow for residential development. Fast forward, we come to 2020, and now we're hit with a pandemic, and we are still dealing with that pandemic. That has further eroded the development of retail throughout the country. So let's talk a little bit about the state of retail development within the City of Independence shopping centers. That overall picture is very bleak. Brick and mortar retail is vanishing. Nolan Fashion Square is empty. Bolger Square is down to just a Target store. Stores are closing along 39th Street, such as Barnes & Noble. Independence Center has lost 2 major anchors. apartment heritage is half full. Eastland Center is able to survive because amendments to its TIF plan. Those amendments allowed for CarMax to go into the center, allowed for an apartment complex, and then of course allowed for the city to build Cable Dahmer Arena. Trinity Development likewise was modified to permit apartments in lieu of retail not too long ago. So next slide. So let's talk a little bit about the cost benefit analysis that was provided in the TIF plan. So this first slide that you're seeing, again, it shows that in 2026, which is going to be the last year that pilots will be collected for this redevelopment project, through from 2022, where you get a partial year, through 2023, 4, 5, and then finally 6, would generate approximately $1.3 million in additional pilots that would be deposited into the city's special allocation fund to go towards debt repayment for this project. Next. So this next slide is showing you on the real property tax side what the impact will be as a result of this project being approved with the project and or with no project. And you'll see, for the most part, there is no impact at all, because project pilots have been, or real estate taxes were frozen in 2005, and all of the incremental increase is diverted to the special allocation fund for the city. There is an exception, however, you'll see for the library district, which will receive approximately almost $9,000 for the remaining life of the TIF. And that's because the library approved a levy increase a few years ago, which is not subject to capture by this tax increment financing project. Next. So this next slide just shows you that what the impact of this project will have on the various taxing jurisdictions on the personal property tax side. And again, you're going to see that for the most part, there is a positive impact. That positive impact is the result of the fact that the residents that will be living in these apartments will be purchasing vehicles, which is subject to a personal property tax and distributed to all of the taxing jurisdictions, with the exception of the city, which, as we all know, does not have a personal property tax. Next slide. So this next slide is just a summary combining both the real property and the personal property tax impact for the taxing districts. Again, for the remaining life of the TIF, which is set to expire in 2027, but the last year that pilots would be collected would be the 2026 year. Next slide. So this next slide, I think, is very important, because this slide is showing us what we project to be the impact on the taxing jurisdictions after the TIF terminates in 2027. So as you go through this, you'll see in that first column, that's the existing tax base that is currently collected and deposited in the, are distributed to the taxing districts. That was the base prior to the development occurring in the project area. The second column is the impact that will result for all of the taxing districts as a result of the TIF being terminated and those property taxes being distributed to all the taxing jurisdictions beginning in 2027 and years afterwards. The third column, I would say that that column does not include any revenue from the proposed apartment development. You're going to find that in the third column. If this project is approved, you'll see that the property tax that will be generated by this development is identified in column 3. Again, a significant revenue enhancement for all of the taxing jurisdictions. And then finally, the last column is the aggregate total of all of the revenues post TIF for all of the taxing jurisdictions. And you can see that it is significant for each and every district. At this point, I'd like to pause and turn it over to Scott Case to talk a little bit about Case and Associates properties in general, and more specifically about the project that they're proposing. Scott? Oops. Scott, are you here?
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. My name is, well, first I wanted to thank the TIF Commission for meeting with us this evening and hearing about our development. But my name is Scott Case, president of Case and Associates. And in the room with me is my father, who is Mike Case. He's the founder of Case, CEO and chairman, and our real estate analyst, Justin Dixon. I apologize for the small screen, but I promise we all look much better on the small screen than we do a large screen. So, but I wanted to tell you a little bit about us and our history and the development, just to give you guys an idea of the quality of not only us as a company, but our development. Case and Associates is headquartered in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and was started in 1983 by my father, who's sitting here to my right. We are a full service property management, development, and investment company with ownership interest in all 100 or over 100 asset portfolio, ranging in 6 states and Kansas, Oklahoma, Texas, Mississippi, Arkansas, and soon to be Missouri as well. Our portfolio consists of Class A, B, and some workforce housing, but the majority of our portfolio was built after 1998 by our development company. So if you can go to the next slide. Next slide. A little bit about our experience. Over the past 20 years, we've built about 59 apartment communities in 14 cities, and we have a great track record of working with our neighbors. Our goal as a management company, development company, is to provide successful professionals, young and old alike, along with active adults and retirees, an upscale place to call home with an abundance of amenities. Our residents want high amenities. They want security. They want safety. They want a quiet place to stay. They just don't want to have to worry about the routine maintenance that you have with a house. And I would like to mention that the most of our residents can afford a home, but they choose an apartment because they want the freedom to travel, to go see their kids, maybe out of state, without having to worry about the maintenance of a house. Next slide. Really, this is just a history of our development. It lists each development individually, but really what I want to focus on is that we are not a merchant builder. Over the last 22 years, we have only sold 2 of those 59 developments, and so that typically means a lot to municipalities, knowing that we've got skin in the game and we're there in the community to stay. The next slide, we wanted to give you guys a comparison in all of the different cities that we are currently in and have developed in. And what I'd like to just point out is the highlighted yellow line is Independence. So everything above that line is smaller than Independence, and everything under that line is a population of greater than Independence. So we are very familiar in this field in little intimate communities such as Independence. Next slide. I'd like to talk a little bit about the development. This is just simply a picture of one of our latest developments in Wichita, Kansas, just to give you an idea of the amenities, the quality, and just some visual pics of our development. So we can go to the next slide. The Falls development is a multifamily garden-style community. It's going to be 275 units of Class A. The value is going to be right at $33 million. As Bill said, it's going to be located right there next to Bass Pro Shop and the Hobby Lobby in Mardell. Our buildings will be limited in height to 2-story and 3-story. It's a frame construction, and the exterior of our property will be either hardy board siding or a cement fiber siding, along with a brick and stone veneer. We've spent quite a bit of time already on the veneer so that we are cohesive with not only the Bass Pro Shop but the Hobby Lobby. That was important to Byron as well as the city, and I think we've developed a product that's going to be very cohesive with that area. The unit mix will be approximately 50% 1-bedrooms and 50% 2-bedrooms, with rents ranging from $900 to $1,550. There again, we'd like to emphasize that this is a market rate development with no Section 8 or government assistance housing. We have not and do not ever intend to do a HUD financing, and so just want to reassure everybody that this is a market rate deal. The next slide will just give you an overview of the site itself. You'll see the Whispering Meadows subdivision. I guess that would be to the west. Hobby Lobby in Mardell. You can see the white roof there to the north, and then Bass Pro there to the east. Next slide. So relative, this is just our site plan. And let's see if the next slide. Let's go to the next slide. I believe this gives you a better visual of how the buildings will lay out. So there again, this is going to be a combination of 2-story and 3-story buildings. The buildings on the perimeter will be either a 2-story garage, loft garage, or a 3-story townhome. The larger buildings in the middle of the site, you see kind of 3 quadrants. Those are going to be our 3-story buildings as well. And we'll go to the next slide. We wanted to show you guys a line of sight. Obviously, the Planning Commission was important to the Planning Commission and the City Council as well, just to give you guys kind of a visual of the line of sight and how the Whispering Meadows homes and the distance to our particular townhouse. So as you can see, our particular development is going to be cut and well below the Whispering Meadows subdivision. So we'll go to the next slide. And let's go ahead and go to the next slide as well, and I'll just kind of talk you through the amenities. These are pictures of our latest development, and just wanted to let you know some of what our interior amenities are. This development will have 9-foot ceilings with abundant windows. As you can see in this picture, we have about 30% of the units will have an LED fireplace with an actual heating element. We've done 4 or 5 developments with the LED fireplace and the TV above it, and it's very well received from the community and the residents. So let's go to the next slide. This is just a picture of our kitchen. As you can see, we do stainless steel appliances. We do a nice cabinet, nice stained wood cabinet. We also have an option of a painted cabinet that I'll show you in a minute. It's hard to see on this photo, but we do a subway tile backsplash as well, along with ceramic tile, a wood look ceramic tile in the kitchen as well. So let's go to the next slide. This is a picture of the, typically we do half of the units with the dark stained cabinets and the other half with a gray or a white. This is just another picture of our gray painted cabinets. You can see the subway tile a little bit better in this photo as well. You can see the refrigerator that we use is one of the higher end refrigerators. It's a side-by-side with filtered water and ice maker built in as well. Next slide. This is a picture of our bathroom. Nothing sexy there, but would like to point out that we do a tile tub surround all the way to the ceiling, and it's not a tub insert. It's actually a ceramic tile with a tile floor as well. Next slide. Then I'd like to just kind of touch on the exterior amenities as well. So if you want to go to the next slide, we'll kind of go through those. So in all of our developments, we'll have a clubhouse center or a recreation center, if you will, and which will include business center with Wi-Fi, internet, and you can scroll through these slides here as we kind of go through. This is a picture of the inside of the clubhouse. This is one that we just recently opened in Waco. And just to give you an idea of how well our developments are received, we actually opened in the middle of the pandemic in September, and we were 92% leased and occupied within 6 months. This is a picture of our fitness room as well. Next slide. Resort style pool with a cabana. We typically do a 75 or 85 inch TV out at the cabana, and we'll do 4 grills as well, creating some social areas for the residents. This is another picture of our pool, beach entry pool. This is our outdoor grills with a fireplace as well. There's another social area with the fireplace and grills. Next slide. This picture here, just to give you kind of an idea of the quality of our development. This is one that we recently built in Wichita, Kansas. We call this our craftsman model. And we'll go to the next slide. This is just simply a different skin. We call this our hill country design. Next slide. And then we're going to get into a little bit of the renditions of which that we're proposing to the staff and the city for our development. This will be the clubhouse. This is a rendition of one of the big buildings that you noticed on the site plan. One of the things I do want to point out is that you can, if you squint, you can see the kind of the shake shingle and the colors and the tapered columns, which is very indicative of that area and the design of Bass Pro Shop. The colors, we've basically color matched between the Hobby Lobby Mardell and the Hotel Stony Creek. Okay, next slide. There again, these are just different building types that we wanted to show you. Next slide. Another building type that's a little darker than in presentation than in real life. Next slide. This is our townhouse building. It's a 3-story building, but each of the 4 units above, it's actually a townhouse with an attached garage. I forgot to mention that in total, we will have 105 garages, with 65 of those garages being attached. So there'll be a direct access. You pull into your garage and you walk straight up into your dwelling unit. Next slide. This is our 2-story, we call it our loft garage building. There's a 1-bedroom and 2-bedroom unit above the 6-bay garage. The 2 bays on the end are actually attached garages with direct access into those units above. And then the 4 garages in the middle was what we call our detached and can be leased by any resident nearby. Next slide. This is a picture of that same 2-story loft garage that we were speaking of. Next slide. We wanted to touch real quick on the resident qualifications. A lot of times, whether it be the homeowners or the cities, they want to know that we qualify. And so this is just simply our qualifications that our requirements is that our residents have had to been employed for at least 1 year and make at least 3 times their rent. One thing we would like to point out is that on average, our residents' income average is about 6 times their rent. Well, what does that mean to independents? Well, that means they've got a lot of discretionary income. And so you guys have a lot of great retail and restaurants in that area. And when we bring in about 400 bodies, then it's history has proven that they're gonna eat and shop in that area. Rental history, we require 1 year of verifiable rental history. We do not allow poor rental history or any violent behavior or drug use or poor housekeeping, any of those things. We automatically deny that application. Next slide. Kind of mentioned this before, but the majority of our residents are young professionals, school teachers, nurses, nurse techs, and we're seeing our average percentage of active adults now is anywhere from 6 to 8%. We're seeing a lot of older adults sell their homes and use that equity to pay rent and travel and go see their kids without having to worry about mowing the lawn and things like that. We also do a criminal background check. We do not allow any felonies or previous history of violent sexual crimes. And then we do a credit check. Obviously, payment history is largely considered. And if they've got any bankruptcies on their credit, then it's typically a minimum of 7 to 10 years before we allow them to rent with us. So obviously, this is an investment for us. So if we can qualify them very well on the way in, we won't have to worry about them paying the rent when the first of the month comes around. This is just our resident demographics over 7 different cities over the last probably 3 to 4 years. Our average occupancy in those developments is 96.25. Average gross income is $61,000 per year. And the average number of occupants per unit is about 1.39 or 1.4. So what that would mean to the Falls development would be that there would be right at just under 400 residents that we move into that area. Some of the industry fields that are typical would be service, medical, education, energy, government, and retired. Next slide. Bill, I'm happy to talk about some of this. You want me to touch on some of these school overcrowding and the number of residents that we typically have on average?
Yes, I think that would be good.
Okay. Obviously, we keep the resident demographics with all of our deals. And one thing we want to point out is that on average, on our newer properties, we average 6 school-age children per 100 units. So what that would mean to the Falls would be just under 20 school-age children entering into that public school system. So as Bill had mentioned before, the property taxes that we pay far outweigh the burden that we would put on the public school system. We are not asking for any assistance from the City of Independence or any municipality or the state. Let's see, just touch on property values real quick. One of the typical concerns from homeowners that their property values are going to decrease. We recently did a study in Edmond, Oklahoma, and the appraiser proved that actually the multifamily has no correlation between negative property values. If anything, the property values were increased as a result of the development. Also, traffic, we did do a traffic impact study, and Olson determined that our impact would be far less than any retail or commercial development. Here's just simply the analysis to kind of give you a comparison. As the site is currently zoned, it accounts for approximately 5,600 trips per day in total. If you go to the next column, that would be our proposed development, would be about 1,500 trips per day, resulting in a negative 4,100 trips per day. Next slide. The benefits of our development. Our particular development will create 8 full-time jobs. That would be 3 office staff with 5 maintenance staff. And then also with that, we will be bringing in over 100 contractors to build the development over a 15 to 18 month time period. Obviously, with that, you've got contractors and residents coming into the generating additional sales tax revenue as well. The next bullet point just simply states that more people are wanting to rent. I mean, we're seeing that nationally as well. And what we've seen over the last 15 years that the home ownership rate has gone from an all-time high of 69.1% down to 67.4% last year. So it's definitely trending towards renting versus owning. Next slide. Bill, do you want to take it from here and discuss some of the letters of support that we received from the local nearby retailers?
Scott, yes, that would be fine. Thank you very much for that presentation. So, Mr. Chairman, I'll just conclude with a few more remarks. As you can see on this slide, we have 4 letters of support from businesses that are located in the Falls at Crackerneck Creek Shopping Center. This first one is from Bass Pro itself, and I would just like to point out on that second paragraph, they're saying that we believe the addition of more residents within the area will increase the opportunity and demand for further retail and commercial development, as well as increase activity for all establishments moving forward. Again, we have next slide, we have a letter of support from Stony Creek Hotels, urging for your support of this proposed amendment to the TIF plan. Next, we have a similar letter from Los Cabos, asking for your support. And finally, next slide, we have a letter from Pizza Ranch also urging you to support this project. I believe with us tonight will be a representative of the Whispering Meadows Homes Association, who will also be speaking on behalf of the project. So next slide. So summarize. As I stated at the very outset, this was a public-private partnership. And I'll point out that this was a public-private partnership before that term ever was in vogue. The city and the developers got together to create an opportunity for the city, for the city's residents. What's happening to us now over the years is we're seeing that retail is dying. On the flip side, we're seeing that multifamily housing is actually thriving. And as you heard from Scott, with the influx of roughly 400 individuals into this development, there's going to be opportunity for those individuals to spend their discretionary dollars in and around Independence, not only at this shopping center, but up on Independence Square and Inglewood. As I pointed out before, this TIF will expire in 2027. And I think that's important for everyone to keep in mind. These apartments are going to generate approximately $1.3 million in revenue for the short term remaining in the life of this TIF. Those dollars are going to go right into the special allocation fund for the city to use towards repayment of debt. As Scott indicated, there are no tax incentives associated with these apartments. And finally, all the taxing jurisdictions are going to receive a significant revenue boost beginning in 2027. And I'll point out that that revenue boost, when you go back to the slide that shows what we're projecting when the TIF is finally terminated, will more than make up, more than likely in that very first year, any shortfalls that any taxing jurisdictions might experience between now and 2027. So with that, I'll conclude and ask, please vote yes on this amendment. And for those taxing jurisdictions, understand that you may have policies in place that do not support the use of residential in TIF project areas. As we've tried to stress in this instance, there's only 6 years left in this TIF plan. There is no benefit that will go directly to the developers of the apartment complex. So for those taxing jurisdictions who cannot vote yes because of their policy, I would encourage you to, rather than vote no, abstain. Because this project is going to be good for you, it's going to be good for the city of Independence, and it's going to be good for your constituents and all the residents of the city. Thank you. And Mr. Chairman, with that, we'll stand for any questions when that's appropriate.
Thank you, Mr. Moore. Is there anyone else who wants to speak in favor of the project?
Yes, I'm here, John Zelk.
All right, go ahead, Mr. Selk.
I'm the president of the Whispering Meadows Homeowners Association. And like this evening's presentation, Case came to one of our meetings and presented a very similar presentation. And then we also attended the zoning meeting, and it was very similar there. Any questions we had were answered, and we feel like this is going to be a benefit to the community, as well as a good neighbor for us. The development, Crackerneck Creek, has been a good neighbor in the past, and I'm sure that that will just continue in the future. So we're very supportive of what's being done.
Thank you, sir. Any other individuals who want to speak on behalf of the project? Not hearing anyone. Is there anyone who wants to speak in opposition to the project or who has questions?
Here, stop talking.
This is Byron Constance. I'm a member of Crackerneck Creek LLC, which is the owner of the property at the present time. We feel extremely fortunate in being able to attract a nationally recognized premier multifamily developer and operator for this project. The Case Ventures company has a sterling reputation, and we're very enthused about being able to bring them to independence. It's a project that's not only good for the falls, but for the entire city. Over the years, it will create substantial tax revenues, as Bill has already pointed out, and will help the city and its bond satisfaction, as well as the other taxing jurisdictions for years to come. It's a win-win for everybody and has universal support by those most geographically affected. And we're just very pleased to be able to bring this project to Independence for the benefit of not only the area itself, but for the entire city. And thank you to the members of the commission for listening to the presentation this evening. The statistics which Bill has presented are impressive. The close study is very revealing as to the city's consideration of its competitive growth challenges with other area municipalities. And for the many reasons that have been presented this evening, we solicit your approval of the amendment to the tax increment financing document. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Constance. Is there anyone else who wishes to speak in opposition or has questions about the project?
I have a few questions.
Who is this, please?
Mr. Martin.
Very good. Go ahead, sir.
Yeah, this real property tax increase to the taxing districts. Property taxes do not go to the city of Independence. They normally go to the county, and it's distributed throughout the county, but not back to the city. So I don't see how that is going to benefit Independence in any way if we're not getting the property tax out of that. So how is this going to get back to the city to repay the debt that's already being incurred with the TIF, which from my calculations is anywhere between 78 to almost $86 million?
Yeah, this is David Martin, Economic Development and Bond Counsel to the city, and I can answer that question. So the increase, the way tax increment financing works, the increase in the property value produces an increase in what's referred to as a payment in lieu of tax that's billed and paid to the county. And then the county remits that to the city for deposit in a special allocation fund, which is then available to, and in this case, pledged to the repayment of the city's outstanding TIF bonds for Crackerneck Creek. So it's a roundabout loop that the money travels through, but it is collected in the same manner as property taxes. And since it is related to that increased value within a TIF redevelopment area, it finds its way into the city-held special allocation fund.
Now that city-held special allocation fund, does that go back to the repayment of the outstanding bonds that this TIF was issued under? Or does the city have the jurisdiction to be able to use that money for whatever purposes they deem fit?
That money is restricted by law to the payment of redevelopment project costs, and it is restricted by pledge to the bonds that were issued for Crackerneck Creek.
Okay. Well, you've answered some of those questions then. And where the sales tax increases that you keep talking about, these are projected by the people that will move into these apartments. And you're assuming that they're going to spend all of their money right there in that little area, eating and drinking and shopping right there and not going anywhere else. I don't think the numbers are really adding up.
Bill, I can let you respond to part of that, but this is really focused on predicting the impact on property tax, since the project itself doesn't directly generate sales tax with sales on that property. The cost benefit analysis is really focused on the property tax and payment in lieu of tax effect. So there will presumably be effects of expenditures within the redevelopment area, but that's not the focus of this particular plan amendment's cost benefit analysis.
Mr. Chairman, if I might add to that, David, I agree with that. And when we referenced sales taxes in the presentation, we were not referencing specific generation of sales tax for purposes, as David said, of impacting the cost benefit analysis. It was primarily to identify that the residents that are going to be occupying these units will have disposable income. They will spend their money. And as I said in my presentation, it's not only going to be within this development, it's going to be spent on at the Independence Square. It's going to be spent at Inglewood Shopping Center. It's going to be spent all over the city and places outside the city. But these are individuals. The point is, these are individuals with disposable income that will spend dollars that will benefit the city, the county, and any other taxing jurisdiction that has a sales tax.
Okay, thank you.
All right, is there anyone that wants to speak in opposition to the project or has questions about the project other than the commissioners? Okay, hearing none. Anything additional from the staff?
No, nothing further from staff unless David Martin has anything.
Yeah, other than just to introduce the resolution, I don't have anything to add.
All right, very good. Are there other questions from the commissioners?
Mr. Cooney?
Yes, go ahead. Who is this? Oh, yes, Mr. Potter, go ahead.
Yes. So I have a question, and I think this may be best addressed by the case group, or it may come from somebody else. But one of the things that I'm concerned about is the market. These are market priced apartments, and certainly I have no problem with your design. It's beautiful. I would live in one of your apartments. And in fact, I think one of my nephews does live in one of your apartments in Oklahoma. But it's beautiful, no question about that. My bigger concern is the market. Can the market actually bear another 400 residents and another 275 units in Southeastern Independence in this 470 I-70 corridor that we're talking about? There's a bunch more apartments that are being built just less than a mile away from where you are. There are apartments all over. What sort of market study have you done to show that we're not just flooding the market with affordable and market rate housing?
Okay, yeah, this is the case group. Obviously, when we go into a market and we're willing to spend $33 million on an investment, we've done our homework. And so what we typically do, one of the first steps that we do when we're deciding whether we want to enter into a market is that we look at the current market. We look at the current market rates. We look at the average rents per unit, and then we also drill down into the rent per square foot. And then also we kind of look at the pipeline in which the new developments are coming online. And so, we spent several months going through this process. And so as of the last time we checked, I think the average occupancy in that surrounding area was right around 96% occupancy. And so that alone, as a developer, and that's what we do, and we develop and manage. So for us, that's between the average occupancy and the average rent, and looking at the pipeline that's coming out of the ground, and potentially, we feel confident that the market can handle 275 units.
And I appreciate that, and certainly, as I say all the time, I know my business, and I get that, and you know your business, and so what is your expectation once you are completed with the project? And I presume this is essentially a one-phase project. This isn't going to be phase 1, phase 4, phase 18. They'll all be built in what, 24 months, 18 months, a year?
Yeah. So our average build time is 15 months. Sometimes it could be 18 months. As you know, Kansas City, that weather up there can be a little troublesome if you hit it at the wrong time. So 15 to 18 months, and this would be a one project. It'd be a one-phase project. Typically, from the first CO we receive, it's about 90 days from our last CO. That's our goal.
And so based on that, year and a half, given everything that works out, how quickly do you feel that you would be at full occupancy? Would you be at full occupancy with reservations before you're even done, or do you think it would be shortly thereafter? Just your best guess based on the fact you know your business.
Yeah, no, that's a good question. So a lot of times what we start pre-leasing anywhere from 60 to 90 days prior to our first anticipated CO or certificate of occupancy.
Right.
Our average over the last 10 years, our average lease up from the day we open the doors till the time we hit 92% occupied and are refinanced with a permanent lender is 7 months. Our last two developments have been 6 months. We've had just a very handful that hit 9 months, and we were very disappointed with a 9 month lease up.
And so you do feel 6, 7, 8 months you'll probably be at full occupancy with this development.
I do.
Based on what you know of the market.
Correct. We do feel very confident we'll be leased up in six months.
Commissioner Potter, this is Mike Case.
Sir.
If we were looking at Independence and there was no Kansas City around it, I don't think we'd be there. But what we find is when we build in the suburbs around the big city, which is kind of what we specialize in, half of our residents aren't going to come from Independence. They'll come from someplace surrounding. They'll drive by, they like what they see. Maybe the wife works one side of the city. And so I don't want you all to think we're going to fill up that with all Independence tenants. I mean, we probably won't. And
I understand.
See what I'm saying? So we're some people just think it's Independence. We're trying for a bigger pool, which is what we typically do. We have a marketing group that'll come in and hit all the major employers, not just in Independence, but a 5 to 10 mile radius around it, so that they know we're going to be opening. They may be giving some specials or some reason to get them there once we open. So we are drawing from a bigger pool than just Independence.
I appreciate that. I do have several comments, but I don't have any more questions for any of the petitioners or the team, so I'll just reserve those comments to later. Thank you for enlightening me and for answering those questions about your homework. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Potter. Other questions from the commissioners?
This is Caleb Clifford, if I could. I think this is to the case group, but has there been any discussion or would you all be opposed to potentially carving out this section of the TIF and putting this specific property back on the tax roll, since you're not really getting a direct benefit immediate from this remaining on the TIF, so that then you could develop as a residential property outside of the TIF?
Well, I suppose as part of the property tax are going to be, they will be, and whether it goes to the TIF or the city or the schools or whatever, I don't think we would control that or would care. But you know, we will be paying that. It would seem that you'd want it in the TIF, but I don't think we'd have a problem if it didn't go to the TIF, but it went to the city, county, school district, or whatever. If that's your question, Bill might be able to help. Bill, you there?
Mr. Chairman, if I might just, actually, I think this might be a better question for David to respond to. But I think the short answer, Mr. Clifford, to your question is because it's in the TIF, I don't believe that at this point you can carve it out, because all the revenues that the entire redevelopment area is pledged to the repayment of the bonds. David?
Yes, the city would have a great difficulty justifying carving out potential revenue producing property from a redevelopment area that had been pledged over a long period of time to the repayment of TIF bonds. So bondholders would have a great deal of concern with any action in that direction taken by the city.
If I could, just one quick follow-up there. I just want to understand, it is possible, correct? Now, there may be contractual issues or getting others to sign off, but you can redefine the parameters, correct?
Yes, so it's theoretically possible in the absence of any of the issuance of debt that has occurred since the creation of this redevelopment area. Were that not the case, then you're correct. They could come back and pass an amendment that removed area from the TIF.
And Mr. Chairman, if I could also expand on that, I think that was also, Mr. Clifford, part of the reason why we were emphasizing the fact that there's only 6 years remaining left in the life of this TIF. It will terminate in 2027. This project, because of the build out, as you heard from Mr. Case, won't start generating revenues until 4.5 years before the time that the TIF will terminate. So that's why we're hoping that the other taxing jurisdictions could get comfortable with the fact that this is residential, even though it's in a TIF. I guess I'm looking at it from the approach that it's kind of a technical issue at this point, because there is no incentive that's going to the development of these apartments.
Thank you.
Other questions from the commissioners?
Yeah, I've got one. This is Troy Schulte, and maybe it's back to Mr. Martin can answer the question. These are bonds. These aren't revenue bonds that are backed solely by the incremental revenues. These are annual appropriation bonds issued by the City of Independence with revenues from the TIF district pledged, but ultimately the city backs these bonds, right?
Yes, that is correct. So there are a number of revenue streams that flow into these bonds. There are Bass Pro lease payments, TDD revenues, payments in lieu of tax, and economic activity taxes within the redevelopment area and from a neighboring redevelopment area. And then additionally, the city has at times had to supplement that and anticipates having to supplement it in the future from other revenues collected by the city due to the fact that the project-based revenues, project-generated revenues have not been sufficient to pay the debt service on those bonds.
And I guess has there been any conversation? I understand the school district and library have policies that prohibit residential because they incur the cost of educating new students or having new patrons patronize their facilities without any tax revenue. I think I see Mr. Potter shaking his head, so I think that's the crux of their argument. Has there been any conversations with the to kind of take on to what Mr. Clifford said, a kind of a revenue split or doing something that the revenues could flow partially to the school district and to the library prior to 2026, that would more than offset their additional costs. To me, the developer's agnostic. He doesn't benefit anything from it directly. To me, this is a conversation for the city to see if they can figure out a way to. I agree with the need for the development. I think it's a good development. It would complement what's going on in a far too retail focused area. So I see the benefit from an overall redevelopment, ongoing development perspective. There's a workable solution here that the city could step up and say, well, we'll take half the revenues and give half back to the taxing jurisdictions prior to 2026 or 27 to make this deal work. Or I don't know, but to me, this is a workable solution if there was an interest on the part of the city to accommodate the needs of the taxing jurisdictions. Just a thought.
I don't believe that has been a part of the conversation. To my knowledge, the city's position is essentially that all revenues produced within this redevelopment area have been and will continue to be pledged until the termination of the TIF, and that they need to be applied to the extent, collected as pilots in that manner.
I have one more question. This is Commissioner Martin again. Isn't that area actually in the Blue Springs School District?
Yes.
So how does the independent schools benefit from taxes going to the Blue Springs School District?
They are not. We are talking about the Blue Springs School District and tax revenues that would flow to that district.
I see. So the taxes that are designated for schools actually go to Blue Springs, but not to Independence. Am I correct on that?
That is correct.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions from the commissioners?
This is Kurt Swanson. I'm one of the commissioners and also on the Blue Springs School Board. If the numbers you presented are accurate, of 21 students per 100 units, that's about 57 students. That's our average cost, about $10,000 a student. That's over $500,000 a year, and any revenue that was showcased is short of that. That doesn't presume any special needs students. So if you have even 2 or 3 special needs students, your cost goes up more than double per student. So that's the potential. I think Commissioner Schulte was talking about some sort of a carve out. If we're in a position just to kind of break even on costs, it's going to have increased transportation costs, we require more bus routes, and we have to look at attendance centers where we have capacity, and that all those are pieces of the puzzle. And I'll just say the apartment complex looks great. Looks fantastic, but that's going to generate students into the system. That is going to increase the cost of schools, and of course, that's the interest that we have around that is where there's that cost benefit, so to speak. Are we at least at a break even or any part of a carve out? And I guess those are the complicating issues of what we're having conversation about. So I want to make sure that's on the table, that any revenue presented tonight that schools might benefit on personal property tax is still going to be short of any educational needs and costs the school will be incurring for the students.
Mr. Swanson, if I could clarify, from the studies that we have done, and maybe I didn't clearly indicate it on that particular slide, but the American Housing Survey, which was completed by HUD, their survey shows that there's 21 school-age children per 100. However, over our last several developments in 7 different cities, our average is 6 school-age children per 100 units. So I apologize if I didn't clarify that correctly.
But you have to understand that the HUD survey, you know, HUD financing is typically a lot of 3s and sometimes 4 bedrooms. We have only 1s and 2s. So we have to rent to children if they've got them, of course, but we're not really catering to the family side. And we have 100 properties, as Scott said. And so we have a good feel for what we have on our apartments that have 1 and 2 bedrooms. And that's the number that's 6 per 100 units, which would make this project have 18 kids. That's not a guarantee, you understand, but that's over a lot of apartment projects that we've built.
Other questions from the commissioner? I have one. I have one of Troy. Troy, I'm not familiar with this suggestion that you carve out part of this. Are you talking about dividing the pilots? Is that the actual carve out so that the city would share some of the pilots with?
Yeah, there's 2 ways you could do it. You could either carve out, you could amend the boundaries of the TIF district, which is what Mr. Clifford talked about, and just exempt this property from the TIF boundaries, so all the tax revenues flow to the taxing jurisdictions. Or you could do a revenue, or basically a pilot split, where you do a separate agreement. The revenues flow normally, but then you can do a cost share or do a cost split of the revenues. Once they flow into the special allocation fund, they're carved up part to debt and part back to the taxing jurisdiction. So you just add another route of how you route the money in the end. So you could route it back to the library and the school district, or any sort of negotiated share off of that. The city would keep a little bit. The county on a short-term measure, this TIF goes away in we're not worried about it. But I understand the policy issues that the library and the school district have. So I'm trying to figure out a solution that might work for all the parties to get a project that I think would be good for the area done. But that's,
and of course, I'm sorry.
And I just wanted to add on to what Commissioner Schulte was saying. I mean, as many people know, Mid-Continent Public Library is multi-jurisdictional, 3 counties, 56 cities. We see lots and lots of different flavors of all kinds of different economic development, incentive programs, and all of that. And what Commissioner Schulte is describing is a proposal that we saw out of the city of Kansas City just not too long ago. That it was actually, I don't even remember the exact jurisdiction or the exact details, but basically what happened is in the pilot, one big piece of pie, 10% of the pilot was allowed to pass through to the taxing jurisdictions, 90% went for the development. And so what that allows people to do is to get some level of support in year 1. I promised I wasn't going to say anything else until my comments, but this was part of my comment. If 50% of the people in that apartment complex use the library, and they probably will, because you're going to attract people who like to read, like to use genealogy services, things like that. So let's say 50% of them use that. And based on our average cost per user, it's going to cost us about $12,400 per year to serve those 50% of residents, or $72,000 over the life of the time where all of the money is being diverted away from us. So we've got to come up with $72,000 to serve these people when we're getting nothing or getting little in exchange. If, on the other hand, we could get 10% of what off of the new construction, then that would be something that would be extremely beneficial, and it would allow us to sort of, plug the dike until we do get that full windfall. This is something Mr. Moore and I discussed. We did discuss this. I think he was very upfront saying that, this is something that the city would have to decide if they were willing to do this. but the city never came back to us and said that they would be willing to allow a pass through. But this is something where you let all the boats rise. If this is the decision, which frankly the other taxing jurisdictions believe this is very poor public policy to subsidize residential developments in any way, shape, or form. But if we're going to do this, then the way to do this is to allow all ships to rise and allow a pilot to pass through on year one.
Thank you. It sounds like we're starting to get into commission discussion. So let's go ahead and see if we need to get any more evidence in. And if not, we'll go ahead and close the public hearing, and then we can transition to commission comments or discussions. Is there any other questions that any commissioner has of the applicant or anyone that was here presenting, staff, anyone? And I'm seeing no takers. So we're going to go ahead and then close the public hearing and shift now to a discussion with TIF members. And the only thing that, and I've heard what Commissioner Schulte and Commissioner Potter have to say. I think the only other part that probably needs to be stated is that if we divide that pot, I mean, the city's looking at that 1.3 or 1.4 to pay down the $80 million in bonds that are out there, you know, that are obviously looming and are an issue for the city. And if we were to sort of divvy up the pot, the consequence would be that there would be less money available to pay off those city bonds. I mean, I just think that's part of what's in the mix too, in addition to perhaps a question of fairness, whether or not, you know, all the taxing jurisdictions are being treated sort of appropriately. So is there other discussion? All right, well, I'm not seeing any other discussion. Mr. Potter, were you finished with your, I mean, I know you.
I'm sorry about that. I jumped the gun. And yeah, I mean,
that's right.
What I said at the end of the public comments were the comments that I was going to make. It has nothing to do with the specific project. I think it's a lovely project. You know, when I spoke to the other taxing jurisdictions, and something that I always like to make sure people realize is that when I serve on a TIF commission, even though there's just one of me on the camera, I'm actually representing the Jackson County Mental Health Department, ETAS, the Metropolitan Community Colleges, as well as MCPL, and actually technically the zoo tax as well. And so I'm representing 5 or 6 people, although I only have 1 vote. And as I commented and went around and talked to all of them, they're very concerned about the notion of moving. I mean, as Mr. Moore mentioned, you know, abatements and development were all targeted at commercial and retail for the last 20, 25 years. And when I first started getting involved with this, the tax breakdown was about 50% residential, 50% commercial. For our library district now, it's about 70% residential and 30% commercial, due in large part to the fact that a lot of commercial taxes are now being abated and diverted. And so now what's going to happen is if we start targeting residential as the source for economic development, it's going to create an unfair tax burden on the people who are still allowing their taxes to go through to support schools and libraries, and less of a tax burden on those. I mean, they're still paying their taxes, as the case has mentioned. Absolutely right. They're paying exactly the same amount as they'd be paying if they're 100% on the tax rolls. The question is, are they supporting those public goods that everybody needs? And as we've been talking about. So this is where I'm saying that this is an issue of public policy, and that there is a larger question that this is very bad public policy to be taking money out of the organizations that are responsible for things like Jackson County Mental Health or the community colleges, and even the library. That is problematic long term and unsustainable.
Thank you. Other comments from the commissioners?
Mr. Chair, Caleb Clifford, if I could just very briefly. I just wanted to, I think somewhat just reiterate Mr. Schulte's point from earlier, and kind of what I was trying to get at as well, is that this seems like a project that the market itself could support, and it seems like a valuable project. And it's frustrating, maybe a slight exaggeration, but I think that there's a way to find a compromise between the other taxing jurisdictions. And just to reiterate what Mr. Schulte said, the county is willing to, let ours stay in there so this project can move forward if that's helpful, and it's not, a lot of money. But, trying to find a way, whether it's carving this part out so this development can move forward and happen. And as was discussed by the developers, there's an expectation of being a, environmental benefit with sales tax in the surrounding area, et cetera, increased activity and everything else that's going to come from this project. But also, just finding a way to share these revenues between the cities and the taxing jurisdictions. And I understand the needs of the taxing jurisdictions and the bond payments that are due for the city. But I really feel like, we could come to an agreement on that. But since we don't have that agreement, I just wanted to, foreshadow that I have to be opposed to this. And that's unfortunate, because I really think that this could be a good project for the city of Independence. And I wish that we could have came to that agreement prior to this vote.
Thank you. Other comments? If there are no other comments from the commissioners, does someone want to make a motion?
I think we can also take a motion to continue this to a date in the future. I think those are all appropriate options at this point.
Mr. Cooney, would you have them read what the motion would be? It's a resolution to recommend to the city council for approval or not approval. Is that correct?
I'm not sure. Well, I don't have a copy of the resolution. Jordan, do you have is there a copy of the resolution you have?
Yeah, I can read the title, and this is just what was prepared beforehand, but it's obviously up to you guys. So this is a resolution of the Tax Increment Financing Commission of Independence, Missouri, recommending that the city council approve the First Amendment to the Crackerneck Creek TIF, or Tax Increment Financing Plan.
I was so moved.
All right. Is there a second? Not hearing a second. I think the motion dies for lack of a second. Is there another motion?
Mr. Cooney, if it's in order, I would move continuing to the next month with the objective to allow the city and development attorneys to negotiate with the taxing jurisdictions for a pilot pass-through.
I think that is an appropriate motion that can be made, but I'll defer to city staff to.
David, is that an acceptable motion, I would assume?
Yes, we can take direction to go back to the drawing table. I think it would be appropriate to suggest a percentage for the pass-through. And I do want to reiterate that the city is subject to bond covenants that state that the pilots, under the traditional definition of pilots that's in the TIF Act, so basically the increase in the property tax, are pledged to the repayment of the bonds. The way that you sort of share revenues, as some of the commissioners were discussing, is by a process called surplusing TIF revenues, specifically in this circumstance, surplusing pilots. And what you're saying when you declare surplus is that those pilots are not necessary for the repayment of obligations that have been incurred, whether it be development obligations or, in this case, TIF obligations that were issued by the city. And so it doesn't take those revenues out of the definition of payments in lieu of tax or pilots. So the city's going to have to make a determination in order to achieve revenue sharing that a portion of what it has pledged to the bondholders would be surplus, which is not in accordance with the way the bond documents are written.
And the final decision would really be with the bondholders. Is that correct?
Well, you could request bondholder consent to this sort of a thing, but these bonds were publicly marketed, which means there are numerous bondholders. And in order to achieve majority consent for something along these lines, there's a process that you have to go through to solicit their input. And history has taught us that in most cases, bondholders simply don't respond. So it is the chance of achieving bondholder consent to something like this are basically negligible because they are just not interested in participating in the process.
Well, it seems to me like to delay this with the possibility of being rejected by the bondholders may indicate to the developer that they don't want to mess with it. I would certainly hate this. I would hate to see us lose that project on the basis of delaying it at the risk of not satisfying the commission in terms of the sharing of the revenue.
I mean, to me, it seems like there's a couple of issues. One would be that, you know, a sensitivity perhaps to the concerns of the other taxing jurisdictions, and the idea that there might be some further conversations that would lay out why that particular sharing is problematic or not problematic in this circumstance. I'm wondering if there's value in that could be achieved by a short delay so the staff could have the opportunity to explore those conversations with the other taxing jurisdictions. I mean, Mr. Potter, is there value in, I mean, you know, I appreciate that you were pulling in an experience from somewhere else, but if in fact it's not possible for the city to do that, my presumption would be that might change your position, perhaps.
Well, I mean, I still believe that it's bad public policy to use any form of abated or diverted taxes for residential purposes, period, full stop. But with that said, yeah, I mean, essentially, I've got experience all over the greater Kansas City area where pilot pass-throughs are allowed to other taxing jurisdictions. Now, I understand that this is an older development and that there is stuff that has happened in the past. I get all of that, but I also know lawyers can be really, really smart and can really figure out lots of different ways to do things when persuaded to do so. And so, you know, instead of saying, no, this is the only way it can be and it's carved in stone, why not investigate this a little bit more? Because as I said, 56 cities all over our library district have figured out a way to do this. So,
but you don't know what all those 56 cities bond issue is either, do you?
I have a decent idea, and I have a decent idea about this city as well. But it's I think that we need to. I think we need to figure out a potential win-win, not a win-lose.
Well, I'd hate to see a lose-lose.
Mr. Chair, can I point out that there is a motion on the floor?
I'll second.
That's what I was coming back to. There was a motion, and there was a suggestion that the motion needed to be more defined with regard to a specific percentage, if I understood that point. So
This is Caleb Clifford. If I could, I'll
Yes.
second Mr. Potter's motion, and I would just suggest that it may not be best to kind of negotiate here during this discussion on what percentages are necessary. So I'll just second Mr. Potter's motion, and hopefully offline we can have those discussions. And Mr. Potter, if there's anything that we can do at the county to help further those, please let us know.
All right, thank you. So there's a motion and a second that the case be continued until next month for an opportunity to have a conversation about sharing the pilots. Is that fair, Mr. Potter? Okay, very good. So further discussion on the motion.
We would need a date certain for that continuance, I think, and not just to next month.
All right.
We'll need to set a date and time.
So just looking at the city's availability, if Thursdays seem to work, April 8th looks like it would be open at 5 or 6 p.m. Or April 1st if we wanted to do it a week earlier.
I
think the preference would be to set it about a month out, because if changes are made, there will have to be a notice procedure that goes out allowing for notice to taxing jurisdictions of amendments. And so in order to include that, I think it would be wise to keep it right at a month. So the 8th would be the preference.
All right. So the motion then would be that this be continued specifically to April the 8th. All right. Further discussion. Hearing no further discussion, Jordan, will you call the roll, please?
Yes. Commissioner Brew?
No.
Commissioner Cormendi? Grace, are you still there? Commissioner Martin?
No.
Commissioner Sampson?
Yes.
Commissioner Swanson?
Yes.
Commissioner Clifford?
Yes.
Commissioner Schulte?
Yes.
Commissioner Potter?
Yes.
And Chairman Cooney?
Yes.
Right. That motion does carry.
All right. Very good. I think that's all the business to come before the TIF Commission tonight.
That's correct.
Very good. Thank you, everyone, for your time. We are adjourned.
Thank you.